What's up, everybody? Welcome to Draft Chaff. This is episode number 56. My name is Zach. I'm one of your hosts, and joining me, as per usual, Ben Fisher. What's up, dude?
Well, you know what? I just found out some pretty cool information, Zach. I found out that we are one of the top 25% of all podcasts, possibly even higher than that. You know, I hear we've been getting shot down from the top. I hear Joe Rogan's after us. I think he wants our viewer base. I think he sees us as competition.
I mean, he probably does want our viewer base because our listeners are the best listeners, but
that's true.
He also probably has no idea we exist. Not probably. He doesn't know we exist.
Well, I this is mostly a joke, but I'm referencing something Zach told us before this show. We were looking up some of the statistics on podcasts. We're like, this is a pretty cool podcast we've got going here. I think it's time we pat ourselves on the back for once. We're usually really humble people.
Right.
It's not like we have a trophy channel that I
frequently
post nonsense in. But anywho, let's get into some episode stuff. We've got Adventures in the Forgotten Realms first impressions this week.
Yeah, exactly. So this week we are going to just kind of touch base on this brand new format that we have. It feels a little bit like we've had this format forever now because spoilers ran right into the set dropping and we've been drafting it, and with the internet and arena and stuff, it has felt more and more every single set like 1 week into the set everybody knows what's going on, and it's kind of interesting. I think that's less so sort of happening with this set in a couple of ways, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But before we get into all of that, of course, our usual housekeeping. If you're not in the Discord, check out the Discord. It's a great place to go to chat with the rest of our community, stay in touch with us, and talk all things Magic, whether it's limited or constructed. We tend to have a lot of limited conversation there, but we do have some constructed-oriented folks as well, so check that out if you're into any sort of format. And of course, with AFR just coming out, we have a lot of conversation and discussion going on there as well. So check out the Discord. The link to that is in the episode description as well as on our Twitter. Also, if you want to give back to the show, support us in really the best way that you can would be to go to the Patreon at patreon.com/draftchaffpod. We have a few different tiers over there offering things running from stickers. We have access to show notes, our sort of deck building bonanza with Ben and myself, and a whole lot of different things in between. So definitely check that out if you're interested in giving back to the show. It really keeps us doing this week in, week out, and we can't thank all of our patrons enough. We also have a few new things coming on the Patreon very soon. Ben and I have a bit of a what I would call a strategy session to talk over some of the things that we're going to be doing thanks to the survey we have, and of course you can still continue to answer that. That is open. The link to that will be in the episode description as well, but that kind of helps us shape where we're going with the show and what we plan to do in this second year of the podcast. So if you haven't answered that, definitely do that. That helps us out a lot. But we're going to be talking about a lot of those things this week and kind of working through some of the new things we're adding to the Patreon as well as when we're going to be adding those. So definitely keep an eye on that if you are interested in seeing what we're doing with that.
You said we've got a strategy session coming up. That's a funny way to say we're going to F&M together.
yeah, we're doing that too, but we're also going to talk shop a little bit.
On the drive there.
Right, yeah, it's only like 10 minutes. I mean, we don't really do much with this podcast, so it's just like a quick little conversation that we have, and that'll be it.
Yeah, right. Anyway, why don't we do a crack a draft type thing?
Absolutely, walk us through it.
Right, so this week, got a pack one, pick one, straight from AFR, hot off the press. First thing up, Evolving Wilds, which I found to actually be, something that you really do want in pretty much all of your 2-color decks. And honestly, your 3 question mark color decks, we've seen some weird looking decks. I've noticed a lot of almost monocolor decks that tend to splash like 1 or 2, maybe removal spells or bombs and off colors. And E-Wilds is a good part of that. Between this and the Dragonland, I think it's called like Temple of the Dragon Queen. This is really all the fixing you get land-wise, so I'm always pretty happy having an E-Wilds in my deck.
Yeah, this is a weird set in terms of that. It's been a long time since we've seen a set with basically no fixing in it. And that's not entirely true of AFR, right? Because treasures abound. They're all over the place. But we're not used to not seeing duels in sets. So E-Wilds is certainly a card that you want to be keeping an eye out for. Not a first pick, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the fixing is fleeting thanks to treasures. I've noticed sometimes it's tough to cast double pip spells. Playable uncommons and rares. I don't think many commons, but a lot of them, have these double pips, and occasionally you'll have a weird draw and you won't be able to cast your, say, your Air Cult Elemental, which is up next. That's 4 blue for a 2/5. It's an elemental of flying. And when it ETBs, return up to one other target creature to its owner's hand. Now, that's not only opponent stuff, that can be your stuff too. So you can, I don't know, bounce something that was charmed to sleep or locked down otherwise or something like that. This card is overperformed for me. I really like it. I think they actually, funnily enough, they pair in multiples pretty well, which isn't something you usually say about a 6-drop. You're not going to play 4 or 5 of these things, but if you need a top end, bouncing something and then swinging in and then bouncing something else, it's a good game plan. These things are tough to kill.
Yeah, and 5 toughness is huge in this format. I mean, it blocks pretty much everything, so it's a great stabilizer for tempo decks. I could even see it at the top end of like potentially like some of the blue-based aggro-ish decks. Like I think it's a good top end for some of the blue-black decks, which is kind of the only place I want to be playing blue, and then maybe blue-red depending on your build. But yeah, Air Cold Elemental has risen quite a bit in my estimations since we started looking at this format.
Risen all the way up into the sky there.
Right.
Next up is Circle of the Moon Druid. That's 2 and a green for a 2/4 human elf druid at common. As long as it's your turn, it's a 4/2. So then, this one's been like fine. You'll put it in the decks that want it, but sometimes when you leave this thing back on defense, it feels bad because it wants to be attacking. It's got 4 power, but then it's trading down with like 2-drops. So yeah, it's never really at its best. You would rather have the 4/2 on defense if you wanted it, and I guess the 2/4 if you wanted to attack into a weird board. Okay, maybe it's halfway at its best sometimes, but it's fine. Put it in your green decks if you need cards.
Yeah, blocks Hobgoblin Captain really well, which is a big deal for some of these green decks, which aren't very aggressive sometimes and don't really have a great way of stopping that card otherwise. So it is pretty solid, but I think it's worse than a lot of people thought it was going to be when the format started.
Next up is Contact Other Plane. 3 and a blue for an instant. It's when we roll d20, 1 through 9, draw 2, 10 to 19, scry 2, draw 2, 20, scry 3, draw 3.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yep. Put it in your blue deck. I really do like building around the rolling synergy. I had a fantastic trophy deck from earlier today that was just blue-red dice rolling, and Contact Other Plane was a nice part in it. It helps refill your hand, which sometimes you do need in this format. Card advantage is pretty solid. Again, can't put infinite of these in your deck. You'd have to affect the board in this format too, or else you're going to get run over by little dorks. But you do want to have one of these in your blue deck.
This card does tend to feel bad a lot of the time, though, when you're spending your 4 mana to, contact the other plane and your opponent's playing like Brunor, Battlehammer, and you're just like, oh, I guess I'm just going to die now. Okay.
Yeah. Next up is Faraday's Fireball. This is 3 red for an instant. It deals 5 damage to target creature or planeswalker and then roll d20. It either deals 2 damage to each player or 2 damage to each opponent, depending on if it's 1 to 9 or 10 to 20. So I think with these cards, we've really started to see this trend of 5 mana, deal 5 damage to something, and then somehow it deals some damage to the controller. This has been a trend for the last 3 sets. There was the what was it? God, I'm already forgetting cards from from Strixhaven.
Pigment Storm.
There was Pigment Storm in Strixhaven, and then what was the one from ZNR? That one dealt damage based on party. So in this one, we're kind of guaranteed 2 damage. So this no matter what is dealing 2 damage to your opponent, which actually makes it a pretty good top end for aggro decks. I really like having 1 or 2 of these at the top end of an aggressive build, because then this is going to deal 2 face damage and remove a key blocker. I mean, it takes care of pretty much anything besides one of the, I guess, 6 or 7 toughness. There's not too many of those. But, I mean, you're not taking the super high. You can't play infinite of them either. I guess that's kind of the trend with this set. None of these cards so far, these are all pretty solid cards, but Faraday's Fireball, it's fine. I'd like to play 1 or 2.
Yep.
Next up is Fate's Reversal. That's 1 of the black for a sorcery. Return up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Venture into the dungeon.
Yeah, this card's been fine. I've seen it played decently in both green-black and black-white. Sometimes I've seen it in black-blue, but it really does kind of fit its best in the black-white decks that are really caring about those ETB triggers and trying to trade off Death Touchers and buy those back and things of that nature. The Venture's fine, and the black-white deck can capitalize on the Venture much more than a lot of the other ones can, so I feel like it fits best there, but it's a fine card. I'm definitely not looking to first pick it, though. I like a lot of these other cards much better.
Yeah, definitely not. Again, this kind of card gets better when your creatures are better. If you have a specific card that it happens to be a bomb or happens to be really good at trading like a Death Toucher, then this card gets a little bit better. Next is Potion of Healing. That's 1 and a white for an artifact. When it ETBs, draw a card. Then it has white, tap, sack it. You gain 3 life. I haven't cast this
I
yet.
have, and I saw it used against me to remarkable success. The problem was it relied on a rare, which was Teleportation Circle. Teleportation Circle can just bounce this over and over again, and you're just drawing cards. It's kind of like...
Oh my god, that can blink artifacts?
It sure can.
Whoa.
So in that case,
up.
it works quite well, and it is a little bit of a panic button where you can gain 3 life when you need it. So it's fine. It's not a great card though. I still put this at like a C-, and even then, it's like it takes that 1 rare to make it even really good. But it is fine as a 23rd card in those green-white life gain decks.
Yeah, having a life gain trigger that you can do at instant speed. There's some neat little combos. I'm trying to think of some corner cases. You can untap the Roper. You can scry on upkeep with Trelisara if you're going.
Well, you
really
can
deep.
pump like Celestial Unicorn and Trelisara on your opponent's turn if they think they can attack through the 2 of them. You can pump them on instant speed, things like that. I mean, it's on the board, so it's not like you really can expect to get your opponent with this, but it's there, and it is effectively gaining you 3 life. That's sitting on the board, so it's okay.
Next up is Price of Loyalty. That's 2 and a red for a sorcery. Gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap the creature, it gains haste until end of turn. If mana from a treasure was spent, then it gets +2/+0 until end of turn.
Yeah, we'll talk about this a little bit more in the when we talk about deck vectors in like later in the show. But this card has a home and it can do work.
Yep. And if you want to find out what home that is, like, comment, and subscribe. I haven't got one of those in a while. Just wait for later in the show. We'll talk about it. Next up is Silver Raven. That's 1 blue for a 1/1 artifact creature. It's a bird. It is flying. When it ETBs, scry 1. Why is this in the set? I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't really either. I mean, it's, I guess, another good like flicker target, but the only card that can really do that is Teleportation Circle. So otherwise, it just doesn't. Yeah. Maybe it's there just as like I really don't know. But I have seen it played, and I've never felt it be like, oh crap, my opponent played a Raven. It's just fine. Although I will say flyers can be hard to deal with in this format. There aren't amazing reach creatures, and there aren't, unless you're in the decks that have a lot of flyers or have access to a lot of flyers, they can be hard to deal with. So equipping this up with almost anything can make it big and an actual threat, but meh.
Yeah, that's true. If you're playing a bunch of little 1 mana 1/1 flyers, which there's this in the Hawk, and then your opponent is playing like 3 mana 1 power creatures, of which there are a good number, you might just be able to outpace your opponent.
Yeah.
If you can dump your hands of little dorky 1/1 birds and then get in. All right, I guess it's in there to complete blue-white bird tribal, but I would not recommend playing this card. It's been pretty close to an F every time I've seen it. And our last comment here is you find a cursed idol. It's 1 and a green, sorcery, choose 1. You can smash it, blow up an artifact. You can lift the cursed, destroy an enchantment, or you can steal its eyes, make a treasure, and venture.
So for me, the big like highlight marquee effect from this card is the ability to destroy an enchantment. There isn't a ton of enchantment removal, and the enchantments in this set are good. The class enchantments are very good. So having access to a card, especially if you're playing traditional where you can bring this in the board, having access to enchantment removal is pretty strong. I wouldn't say this is the best it gets as far as enchantment removal in this set, but it's good to have access to.
Honestly, there's some good artifacts.
That's true.
Think of Portable Hole, the Gargoyle, Plate Armor, any of those big equipment. I'm pretty happy main decking one of these in green, and the failsafe of just making a treasure and venture, it's kind of like a temporary ramp spell, and then you get to venture to maybe scry. It's not quite cycling itself, not quite drawing a card, but I think the flexibility of this makes it something that every green deck probably wants a copy of this,
Yeah, I would
right?
think so.
So what are you on so far of this pack?
Yeah, I think for me it's probably the Circle of the Moon Druid because it's just I think the most well-rounded pick. I could see either that, Faraday's Fireball is also solid, but the rest of these cards aren't like really yelling at me. I like the Air Cult Elemental. I just don't want to take a double pip card that's a 6-drop in my first pick. I think the Moon Druid really just goes into more stuff.
I'll be honest, I haven't loved green.
No, it's definitely not the best color. In fact, I think spoiler alert, I think red's the best color in this format. So maybe I would actually lean towards the Fireball more so, as it's decent removal.
I'm taking the Fireball right off the bat. But then I think our uncommons are going to change that. We've got Skullport Merchant. That's the 2 and a black for a 1/4. It is a dwarf citizen. When ATBs, you create a treasure. And then it has 1 in the black, sacrifice another creature or treasure, draw a card.
So again, with red-black, which I am spoiling a little bit there too, we'll talk about this sub-theme, but the Merchant fits in that deck very well. Otherwise, it fits in every black deck. I mean, it's just Sailor Means, but better. And awesome. I love this card. This would probably be my pick as well. It just does way too much for the cost. It's just great.
Next up, we've got Grim Wanderer. That's 1 in the black for a 5/3 flash at uncommon, but you can only cast it if a creature died this turn.
I really like this card, but I have seen it awkward to play occasionally. You really have to be on top of your sequencing for this card to be good, but when it's good, it's great.
I had a game where I checked my opponent for traps, and I saw this, a bounce spell, a kill spell, and several lands in my opponent's hand, and they had nothing on board. So I took the kill spell and just ran them over. Both the bounce spell and the Grim Wanderer were stuck in their hand for the rest of the game. Now, we have a rare here. You notice I skipped an uncommon. I'm going to get to that in a bit. We have a rare here. Tasha's Hideous Laughter. 1 blue for a sorcery. Now, apparently this is an actual spell in D&D, right? Yep. Is this accurately represent what the spell does? Looks like it's making a blue dragon laugh.
Yeah, basically. I mean, yeah, you cast it on a thing, and they are more or less, if they fail their saves, they are more or less incapacitated with laughter, and it damages them too. But
I guess this kind of does that. Each opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until that player has exiled cards with total mana value 20 or more. Weird. Yeah. This will usually mill, like 15 to 20 cards. Probably not great, given that no one really cares about mill. I could see this being sideboarded in if you're in a control matchup where you really want to, you expect the game to go long anyway, and you expect the game to go down to when your opponent has like 10 cards in their library, in which case this becomes great. But just know that when you cast this, it does nothing to affect the board or their hand or their life total or anything. It's a pretty big risk. I would only really play this in best of 3, and I would only ever sideboard it in.
Yeah, and there are no other real mill finishers. Like, mill is not a sub theme in this deck format at all. So yeah, I don't think I'd be taking that here. But what was that about missing an uncommon?
Right. So I'm gonna throw a little curveball at you here. This is a pack 1, pick 2. Ready? I'm gonna throw you for a loop here. Pack 1, pick 1 was Varus Silvery Moon Ranger. That's the 3 mana 3/3. It's the rare elf. So whenever you complete a dungeon, you make a 2/2, and whenever you cast a creature spell, you venture.
Yeah, that's in green, right?
So given that information, yeah, it's 1 green. Given that information, what do you take out of this pack?
Yeah, I think that more strongly puts me into the druid. I like to try to stay open, and we'll talk about more what I mean by that as we get into the rest of the episode, because I don't think it means the same thing in this set that it has in the last few sets. But they pair decently. And what's the rest of that card's effect? I don't actually remember Varus off the top of my head.
Whenever you complete a dungeon, you get a 2/2 wolf.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd probably... Do we know if there were any other good green cards in that pack that we might wheel?
No, I don't think they were off the top of my head.
Okay. I think I'd probably just take the druid, try to stay monocolored for as long as I can. Or it's hard because in this format, I don't think you actually should do that. I don't think you necessarily should try to stick to a single color for as long as possible because of the way that these decks just, the power level of them just don't really ever get there. I don't think you should be trying for like synergies or anything like that. So generally, at least for the first few picks, more so than most other formats, I think it's best to probably just be taking the best card in every pack and try to gauge which colors are open just so you can grab the best cards in all those colors rather than trying to like build a full deck or like draft a full deck.
Yeah. So
I think that makes it a little bit tougher. There's not really a lot of ways to venture into the dungeon in green. Like there are some, but it's not like the most venture-y color. So maybe I would just take black and maybe I end up in like a black-red splashing this kind of deck. And then you can venture a handful of times and it might actually be like a real card. So I'd still be eyeing the Skullport Merchant. I think I want that more than the Grim Wanderer myself because it just seems to fit into more and has a higher floor as well. But
yeah. So I actually took the Grim Wanderer here. I think that was a mistake. I think I should have taken the Merchant. Green Black really does care about those sack triggers and drawing stuff. And I routinely see Shesras wheeling because nobody else really wants them besides exactly Green Black. That's not the kind of card you're splashing. A 4-mana 1/3 with situational value. So I think I should have taken the Merchant here and drafted some sweet, I don't know, Green Black nonsense. I mean, I was still clearly going for that, but look, you give me a 5 power 2 drop, it's kind of hard to resist.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, on to Teferi Tibalt. This is our Roses and Thorns style segment where we share a high and low from the past week for each of us. Ben, kick us off.
Right, so my Teferi is that, well, we get to hang out and do something in person, which is kind of rare. It has been for the last 2 years at least. The last time we played Magic in a tournament setting together was GPNJ.
Yeah, it was my
right?
birthday. Yeah, two years ago, a year and a half ago. Yeah.
Wild to think about, unless you count all the arena stuff, which I guess we can.
Yeah, but it's not in person.
Let's be real. Yeah, there's so much more to Magic than what we've got from Arena. And for everybody that's listening that started playing on Arena, gotta go out to your local game store, gotta play in some F&M events because it's a whole different ball game. There's honestly no other feeling in the world like attacking your 3/3 into your opponent's 4/4 when they're tapped out and you have full mana, and you just look at them. Oh man, I can't wait to do that. But and of course you don't have the trick. You never have the trick. Yeah. We should do another bluffing episode sometime soon. Anyway, that'll be. I'm hoping to open up some good stuff, and hopefully we don't get queued against each other, immediately.
Yeah, that's kind of the curse that Ben and I have had. Almost every event we go to, we get paired against each other like round 1 or 2, and then it's just like,
yeah,
rather see you in the final. But
yeah, and then I do think it's a little bit weird that we know all the cards already. I do miss when pre-release was the very first time you get to play with stuff, because now, I don't know, it feels a little strange that some grinders might show up to the pre-release and already kind of know exactly what they're building. You're not quite as excited to crack that mythic if you already tested it and know it sucks. Like, I don't know. I'm still going to have fun with it, but it's been dampened a little bit. My Tibalt is, well, partly that, and then partly the fact that I have online training this week. Now, I signed up for this months ago when the school principal asked, like, hey, you want to do some training? And I figured, yeah, sure. That's in like 3 months. I'll forget about it by then. I'm not thinking about that now. And now that it's actually here and I'm doing it, it's too much. I'm in summer mode. I was on the beach all day yesterday. So having to sit in front of a computer and listen to some people talk about initiatives and other, acronyms. No, thank you. But thankfully, that's why God made dual monitors, so that I can have my training up on one and Arena up on the other.
There you go. Way to capitalize on your productive downtime, I guess. Productive procrastination. One of those two.
Something like that, yeah. How about you?
Yeah, so I had a very wild week. There was a lot of action going on for me this week. I mentioned last week that Hannah and I, my wife and I, have been working on finding a new apartment. We're going to have to move out of our current apartment in about a month and a half about 2 months. So we went apartment shopping last week. We ended up finding an apartment and signed a lease. So we're all set.
Nice.
Which
we're at. Dox yourself.
Yeah, it's in Hoboken.
Give me the street address.
Okay. So not terribly far. It's like 20 minutes down the road from where I am now, but it's in a much nicer town, and I'm very much excited to go back there. That's where I went to college, so it'll be nice. It was a great deal, and it was an apartment that I actually didn't intend to look at, so it was one of those like really kind of just freak situations that ended up being way better than I expected it to.
Sweet.
Yeah, so very excited about that. But then also, my company was sold this week, so it's like, which can be ridiculous and like very frightening. But my bosses are fantastic and negotiated a great deal for the acquisition. But the funny part is that the company that acquired my company, and I say it's really just the company I work at. I don't own it. But the company that acquired us is IBM. And I used to work at IBM. That was the first job I ever had was with IBM. So
you're back at IBM? They tracked you down, dude. You can't get out.
Yeah, that's what everybody said. They're like, you thought you could get away. So that'll be cool. I mean, what it basically means for me, because they bought us for what we do and like the people we have and all that kind of stuff, because I work for a consulting company, so we don't have like a ton of real products that we can give or increase value in that way. So they're keeping us like our own unit. All my bosses are staying, so it's going to feel very much the same, but we get better benefits. I got a retention policy, which just means that if I stay there for a year, I get a huge lump sum of cash for being there, because acquisitions scare people away. So, it seems like it's all positive for me. I'll let you know in a year if that's true, but it seems pretty cool. So
set my calendar now.
Yeah, so exciting things. Glad that's going on. And then we have our trip to Germany coming up soon. That's in like 2 weeks as well. So actually exactly 2 weeks from today we'll be leaving. So that'll be very fun, very excited. Hopefully that all goes smoothly as well. My Tybalt is that I have been doing so poorly in AFR that I can't actually draft anymore. I'm out of resources. I've got to grind up some gold and get back into the arena. But I don't know. I think my win rate right now is about 40%. It might even be a little less.
Ooh.
So yeah, it's been awful. And I think I know why now. We'll get into it in a little bit, but we'll see. We'll see. Hopefully I can turn that around.
Well, I do have good news. Sometimes I use Quick Draft as a way to kind of convert gold into gems. Once you hit 5,000 gold, you fire a Quick Draft, hope to trophy it, then boom, you're halfway to the next in-person draft, and you just got to do it again. So right now, Quick Draft is ZNR, which I think we're both pretty big fans of. ZNR is a lot of fun. I love smashing people with the little goblin 5/2 common and all sorts of party nonsense. I possibly even drafted an Akiri deck recently.
Yeah, I may or may not have seen that in our Trophy Decks channel.
Yeah. Oh man, I missed that. I had two of the Warrior Lords too. I had a turn 5 kill one game where I took my opponent from 17 to 0 in one turn. It was awesome. Nice. So grind up some gold and then just farm ZNR.
Yeah, sounds like a plan. I do want to play a lot of the new set though, so I feel bad like wasting resources on that. Maybe I'll wait until Quick Draft for AFR comes around and then I'll do that, but we'll see. All right, on to our listener question of the week. If you want to ask a listener question of the week, jump in the Discord and check out our listener questions channel where you can add those. We grab our questions from that channel in our Discord. So if you want to have yours featured on the show, that's the place to go to have that happen. This week's question comes from Rob Dies at the End asking, in a set with no duels, is it worth it to pick up or play an Evolving Wilds or something similar for a 2-color deck? The short answer is yes. Evolving Wilds is not bad enough that you shouldn't be grabbing them when you need them, but this is a weird set because you can kind of splash a lot of different colors due to the treasures that are running around all over the place without really needing to support them in your mana base.
Mm-hmm. If you're playing a heavy venture deck, you can pretty reliably know that you're going to get that treasure from the Lost Mines, right? And I guess if you're planning on doing heavy splashing, you don't want to be splashing double pips. That can be a little spooky unless you're in, weirdly enough, the black-red deck, which can just go nuts with treasures. Black-red has been incredibly impressive. Kalane, the painter, is very, very strong. I've seen some disgusting things with that card. But that being said, really the only lands we have access to besides the mono-colored rares are E-Wilds and what I mentioned earlier, Temple of the Dragon Queen. So I guess E-Wilds is technically a little better because it thins your library.
It's debatable.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think
they're pretty close.
I think the Temple's great though. I think it's a card that most people are too low on, just based on how frequently I see it table, and it's definitely worth picking up. It's the treasures are not so reliable in the non-black red decks that you can just expect them to be there when you need them in most cases. Yeah. And if you know you're splashing a card that you need your treasures to cast, you obviously should be a little more hesitant to spend them on cards that are not that card. But there are also a lot of double pip cards that you can splash because they're expensive. So if you're like playing, if you're splashing an Air Cult Elemental or Mordenkainen, for instance, I played I think it was a green-white deck, which splashed Mordenkainen off of basically treasures because it's a 6-drop. So you only need, you have a lot of time to get to that by the time, you actually are hoping to cast the card. So it can be done is all I'm saying. You can maybe play a single island to splash a double pip Air Cult Elemental and, get that one treasure by turn 6 so you can actually cast it. That's not the end of the world.
Hmm. That being said, I would still take Evolving Wilds or the Temple at something around like a C to C plus level, depending on how many double pipped cards you already have. If you have some intense mana requirements and a lot of your best cards do require you to have double pips, we've been spoiled recently with a lot of good fixing, duels at common, environmental sciences. This is not that world anymore. And even in Strixhaven, a lot of the cards that we were interested in playing reliably had single pips, or the double pip cards are more expensive. Sometimes I just get an opening hand where I can't cast my bugbear on turn 3 with haste. And just I have like 2 swamps and a mountain. I'm like, all right, whatever. Wish I had a dual land here, but that's the world we live in now. I'd recommend taking E-Wilds at, I'd say, a little bit above a C.
Yeah, also, like, real brief tinfoil hat moment, I'm 99% sure that they either changed or bugged or removed the hand smoother for best of 1.
Look, I've been getting some circumstantial evidence of that too, but I'm not ready to go full tinfoil.
I'm ready. I'm here.
Quite yet.
Something changed.
You've seen all the screenshots that have been posted in the Discord, some by me, some by others. Oh man, I had a screenshot this morning where my opponent had like 7 mana worth of X1s, and I had a magic missile, and like 5 swamp, 5 islands and a mountain. And it was so rough. I ended up winning the game anyway, because I just top decked a bunch of Dragonfires, which are also very good. I ended up not needing it, but it was painful. It was really painful.
Yeah, I've seen a lot more.
Could have used an E-Wild.
I've seen a lot more 1 or 4 lander hands than I'm used to seeing. Like, it's been noticeable. So, and I'm not the only one who said that. You've said it. We've seen others in the Discord mention it. So I am pretty confident something changed there. I don't know if it was intentional, but I'm pretty confident something changed there.
Maybe the wizards over at 17 Lands can let us know. I think they're probably pretty busy. I noticed there was another change with the arena logs that makes it harder to watch game replays. So those aren't available right now. Or no, it's not that. It's that the card data isn't available right now or something.
The logs changed pretty drastically from what I understand. So a bunch of things were messed up, but.
Circovitz and Hulu and Viral Misnomer. Godspeed, friends. Good luck with that.
Yeah, well, on to our AFR first impressions. We're obviously going to go over what Ben and I have been thinking of AFR so far. Now that we've had, basically a week to adjust to the new format, we're going to cover things we like, things we don't like, and pretty much everything in between. So to start us off, what do you think of the format overall so far?
I'm not going to lie, I'm not totally sold on it yet.
Yeah, it's not Strixhaven, right?
Yeah, no, it is definitely not. Let's see. I have fired 16 drafts. My win percentage is 53%. I'm 50 and 44 in games, and 2 of those have been trophies. Among those, there have been some other ones, some 6 wins, some O3s. I've had a whole wide spread, and I will say it's taken me a little bit to kind of get a hang of this format. Although only in the last 48 hours have I really started to feel things clicking. So if you haven't felt it click yet, don't worry, we're going to try to share what we have observed. Like I said, I'm not totally confident in any of my hypotheses on this format quite yet, but we can at least share some of our observations and then maybe help us and you make some better hypotheses. So I've had some powerful decks that ended up flopping. I've had some mediocre decks that ended up getting a lot of wins. So it's taken some readjustment on all of our part.
Yeah, so on my end, stats-wise, I have run 6 events, so 6 premier drafts. I am currently 11 and 18 overall match record, and that puts me at a 37.9% on overall in this format, which is awful for me, at least. Like, if that's where you're at and that's like your highest that you've ever been, great, because that's great. Any improvement is awesome. This is not improvement for me.
I'm going to take this opportunity because I don't get this very often. You're a very good player, to say get good.
Right. Yeah.
And obviously that win rate's going to go up. But
well, I don't know. I mean, I'd like to think that that's obvious, but who knows? Maybe this is just not a format I'm going to click with, and that could be the case. But it's definitely different so far from the last few formats. It feels somehow more paupery, but also more princey at the same time. It's definitely a pauper set, I would say, overall. It has a lot of low-powered commons and uncommons that are just there doing their thing, and that's what you're filling your deck with, but there are some really bomby rares and mythics, and those are seen. Like, we run into those. You run into Imrith every so often, and you're just like, well, I don't know how I'm winning this game. So, those things happen. Uncommons plus matter a lot more, it seems, in this format than others, and the commons all pretty much across the board feel pretty bad. except things like, maybe Dragon's Fire. But most of the commons feel like pretty bad compared to what we've had lately, and I think that's probably because this set is weird in that it was designed as a core set, but it flavorfully doesn't feel like one. There's a lot of new mechanics. There are a lot, even though really the only new mechanic is Venture, but there's a lot of new feel and flavor to this thing. We have a lot of those like modal spells. It just feels like an actual set as opposed to a core set, and that has been a weird shift I've had to make in mentality to recognize, like, we're supposed to be building core set decks in this format. We're not supposed to be building these high powered, like, all my bombs are just going to win me the game kind of decks. We're supposed to be building these flat, like, maybe 4 or 5 out of 10 decks, but they're consistent and they're going to do the thing that they do, right? 2 drops matter a lot. 3 toughness seems to really matter. Even 4 toughness because of, like cards like Hobgoblin Captain. There are also a few Pinger Death Touch combos, which I found to be pretty fun. Like, there are a couple of them. It's not just like there are 2 specific cards that do it. Like, you can put it together with a handful of cards. So that's pretty fun. Mm-hmm. So there are some things going on here that are pretty interesting, but I think overall it's a flat format. It's not exactly the most exciting format, though there are some decision points to be made and there are some things still yet to figure out.
I have been a big fan of giving a basilisk a throwing knife.
Yeah, that's one way to do it. Then there's also the Reaper Talisman, which gives creatures Death Touch, and the red common that deals 1 to things that block it. So that's another way to do it.
Oh my god, that's sick. So again, some more notes on the overall format. We're going to kind of go over a few topics. We're going to start with the overall format, chat about some of the specific decks, talk about Venture, the role of card advantage, and then some miscellaneous notes. So starting off with the format overall, it's a weird one. And now that I've been framing it more as a core set where power level is a little bit lower than we're used to, there's still some differences between this and, say, the last few core sets. Creatures are pretty good at attacking / getting through, thanks to Venture or Death Touch or the rogues that have, like, sneak abilities or rolling triggers or equipment. Creatures want to be attacking. They're built to be attacking, but they're not necessarily very good at dealing damage. They tend to be smaller, have lower power, have bigger toughness than power. I think the 2/5 blue one that ventures when it deals damage is a perfect example. At 4 mana, that's not the kind of thing you'd usually expect to see and put in a deck, but you can. I found it to be okay in the decks that want it, specifically blue-white. I've been cutting it from a lot of my other ones, but I guess black-blue wants it too. Not playable in blue-red, I don't think. But anyway, especially there's some equip things that make unblockable. There's fly. There's the one equipment that I think Thieves' Tools that gives unblockable. Lots of ways to get through, but you're not necessarily going to kill your opponent before lots of triggers start happening.
Yeah, and this is kind of weird because when we did our format breakdown, for the first time since we started doing format breakdowns, we decided to throw in stats on average power and toughness in 2 drops to make a statement about what the aggression level of the format might be. And while we were right on the numbers, I mean, the numbers are numbers, they were misleading. And this is a perfect example of where just looking at numbers is not enough. You need the context that those numbers belong to really form an opinion and an idea about things. But those numbers, average power, average toughness of 2 drops in this set, would have implied that the set should be relatively slow, but it's not. I mean, it's an aggressive format, and it's relatively quick. There are a lot of things, as you say, that want to be attacking. And though not all of them are good at getting damage through, a lot of those equipments help a lot with getting extra damage through. And when those creatures are good at getting through, they're still applying pressure and they're still causing opponents to go on the back foot because they need to figure out how to deal with these things. I lost a game recently to literally Guild Thief. I had one of the best decks I had ever drafted in the format, and I couldn't beat a Guild Thief. Opponent,
it just grew too fast.
Well, opponent was like, hey, I'm just going to not cast my spells. You aren't able to do anything with the cards on my board. All they had to do was keep 1. They actually kept 2 counter spells back, so the only 2 removal spells I had for the Guild Thief just got countered. And then they slammed an Imrith, and I was like, okay, well, now I need to deal with the Imrith and this Guild Thief, and I just can't do both. I just can't do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think the pressure that you were talking about, the pressure being applied by these little dorky creatures smashing in, it's not really life total pressure. It's more like card advantage pressure or venture pressure, if you will, or other value like making treasures or scrying or gaining life or other little things. So it can snowball pretty quickly. That being said, sometimes if everything just trades off, occasionally you will have this late game grind where both players are sitting there top decking, and we're not used to that. When both players are enacting their game plan, sometimes they do go long if they've just been trading off with each other. So consider that your opponent probably has some kind of bomb hidden in their deck somewhere. I mean, this is a core set, so that's how I've decided to start treating it. You do have to consider that your opponent will have something along the lines of like a dragon that can just come down and take over the board immediately. I can't tell you how many long games have just ended the moment somebody top decks their dragon and then the other person hasn't. That can be a little bit of a feels bad, but you know, whatever. Save a kill spell for those guys. Best of one has felt a little bit bad. I think because of this slightly more princey vibe that you mentioned. The rares are very, very good. There's some Baneslayers in the set for sure. Westgate Regent is stupid.
Yep.
Like, that card is nuts. I had a deck with 2 of them, so I had it pretty consistently on turn 5. It was awesome. I think that makes best of one feel worse because you aren't considering when to save your removal for the bombs and that kind of thing. Because, I mean, let's be real, the power level of the commons, like you said, it's pretty flat and it's pretty low. It's balanced across colors. I think black and red are a little stronger, but all colors are playable. So when you use your, I don't know, Faraday's Fireball on your opponent's like 4 mana 3/3 because you had to get in some damage, and then next turn they slam their dragon, you're like, oh shoot, now the game ends, right? But in best of 3, you can, you know, take that, learn from it, and go, okay, well, I have to develop a board to find a different way of dealing with that 3/3 and save my Fireball to actually kill the dragon. Which that's not really something that we had to do too much recently. A lot of our removal or otherwise interaction tended to scale pretty well. But now I think because there's a few more of these bombs running around, I'm going to try to switch over to best of 3. Best of 1 has just had some feel bad moments for me.
Yeah, I think I haven't tried best of 3 yet this format, but I think part of that might have to be a mentality shift when you're playing. Like, you have to play differently and you have to kind of expect, okay, this unconditional removal, this Grim Bounty, needs to be saved for the absolute last minute, where if I don't use it now, I'm probably just going to lose the game, because if there are ways to deal with a lot of these flat, kind of lower powered creatures, and if your opponent does slam a bomb, then you just lose, right? And so you might have to kind of shift the way you're using your removal. But I think that's true too, like managing your sideboard, is a part of Magic, and it should be something that everybody's able to do. But it also does change the dynamic of the game and allows you to kind of plan around what you're expecting to see in games 2 and 3. Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't really think about it too much yet, but I think I'll give best of 3 a try as well at some point if I ever manage to get resources back, and we'll go from there. But
maybe you could steal a little bit from the old draft Chaff budget, skim a little off the top, you know?
Perhaps,
I would never notice.
Well, I do manage all the funds, so.
Dude, you could just be pouring your gems just straight out of our. Hold on, maybe it's time we open up a shared bank account or something.
Perhaps.
But anyway, I will also mention. I'm going to insert this here. It doesn't really fit too well into any of our other subcategories. When you're drafting, I think it's been pretty important to go with the. It's weird. There are these big bombs, right? That you can take and then wind up drafting. Let's say you first pick an Imrith, and then you end up just taking a bunch of like kind of crappy blue cards after that. Well, then you're going to have this deck where you're going to have it's kind of spiky depending on your draws. When you draw the Imrith, great. But if you don't have the support in blue, you're going to have these other games where Imrith is in the bottom 5 cards of your deck, and you just have this kind of mediocre blue X deck, right? Because you got stuck to the Imrith. I think it's important to be able to find your lane and find your color or find your vector, as we're about to talk about, because that is where some of the really powerful stuff starts happening. So, for example, green-white. I've seen green-white do some just disgusting things where they've had all their classes leveled up, and and they've had the innkeeper on the battlefield, which we may have glossed over in our initial review. White does actually have a Soul Warden effect, and it is the innkeeper, and innkeeper is great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's green this time. That's why we didn't know. So anyway, green white. I've seen it like it looks like you're playing a Heliod deck in standard, where every time a thing comes in, you're gaining 2 life and you're putting a counter on a creature, and then you attack and you gain 3 more triggers and life gain, and it can be really, really powerful. But the cards that make up that deck are very narrow. So I think the vectors I would describe as more narrow, they're tighter in this format than others. So for example, you could have a ton of different builds of a late game, I don't know, some kind of late game blue, green, red deck in Strixhaven. If you're playing any of the teamer combinations, there's a lot of different looking teamer decks that are good. Sometimes they have an aggressive package where you're playing stuff like a bunch of pledge mages, right? And then you're kind of going over the top. I guess Prismari or Quandrix pledge mages, and then triggering them and building up and going over the top with them. Or maybe you're playing a more controlling version where you have a draconic intervention and a bunch of elemental masterpieces, and you're trying to control the board until you take over in the late game. Doesn't really look the same way in AFR. The best green-white decks will look like the best green-white decks from what I've noticed, that they have turn 2 Trelisara, and then they have a bunch of life gain after that, and they have these repetitive life gain cards. So I think if you're playing green-white and you are not doing that, unless your deck is just full of bombs and you're drawing them reliably, your deck's just not going to do as much as a reliable green-white life gain deck. This is just this is observational data. Don't take this to heart necessarily. This is we're only a week in, but I think it's good to find that lane. And that's why these uncommon signposts are pretty useful, because when you see one pick 5 and it's in one of your colors and you haven't really set up yet, just take it. That means you're going to be in that vector, and that means that vector is most likely open. So again, a lot of the strongest payoffs are these build arounds. For example, like the signposts or the dice rolling or the venture payoffs or the life gain payoffs. You kind of notice the same thing?
For the most part, yes. And that's kind of why I was talking about earlier, where drafting in this format, like staying open, is a little bit different in this format than it has been in the past. It's not necessarily sticking to a single color as long as possible and then waiting to make your decision on the second color, because not all of the colors, like blue, for instance, you really only kind of want to be playing blue and blue-black. Like, it sometimes works in the other decks, but like that's really all it fits in. It's kind of bad otherwise. So like sticking to blue, opening that Imrith, and then just like, as you mentioned, taking a bunch of mediocre blue cards just to stay in blue so you can play your bomb, and then you somehow end up in like this blue-red deck, but like doesn't have a Farida or like doesn't have a Barbarian class or any of these other cards that like matter for the deck, you're probably not going to do very well. And I think that's also a nice touching point for this format. It's a feature of the format, I think, and I don't know if this was by design. I would assume it is, but those decks that have those like strict identities, and by those decks I mean green-white, I mean red-blue, the ones that have those very specific identities of like, this is doing the life gain thing, or this is rolling the dice, or black-white having the whole venture package. And then from there, you kind of like drift off, I think, a little bit. But specifically green-white and blue-red, you need a plethora of enablers, but you also need a large amount of payoffs, because in your red-blue dice rolling deck, if you never find a Farida or the Feywild Trickster, the one that makes the 1/1s when you roll dice, your deck kind of doesn't do anything. You're just spinning the wheels or rolling the dice, as it were. Like, you just don't do anything. And I've found the green-white deck to be the same way. If you're just gaining a bunch of life, we've talked about cards in the past where it's like, how much life does a card have to gain for it to be worth the mana cost or whatever for you to even put it in your deck? And we were saying it's like an absurd amount of life. It's like upwards of, basically 20 life or whatever. Yeah. Life gain doesn't matter if you can't do anything to capitalize on having the extra time, because that's all it's really doing, is buying you a little bit of time in most cases. And if you don't have a Trelisara or a Celestial Unicorn, you're really, or like a Cleric class, you're really not doing anything, and the life gain doesn't matter. So it's weird, because you need you almost need critical mass of enablers as well as payoffs, whereas we're kind of used to seeing like, as long as I have 1 or 2 payoffs and a handful of enablers, like the deck's going to do the thing it's supposed to do. And that doesn't seem to be the case here, because you might get one of the real payoffs for your deck, but then your opponent just removes it from the board, and then it's like, well, I don't have a way to get that back, so my deck is now just not going to do anything for the rest of the game. And I've had that happen a bunch of times, and that's, I think, why we see these cookie cutter versions of the decks that are like, these are the versions of the decks that are going to win games, and every time somebody posts, hey, I trophied with green-white, it It has a Trellisar. It has a Cleric class. It has, you know, the 2-mana 2/2 with lifelink. Like, these are the cards you're going to see. The Sylvan Shepherd has been really, really good in that deck. The 3-mana 2/3 that roll a dice, gain life, depending on what you roll. All of these are components of these decks, but you need all of them or the deck doesn't come together. Whereas I think something like red-white doesn't necessarily have that. It does have a few cards that you really need to, you really would like to see, Hobgoblin Captain being probably chief among them, but you can still chain together like a handful of equipment and a handful of aggressively slanted creatures and probably still win, even though none of your cards are amazing or really synergizing very well. And I think that's something that a lot of people expected to see in the beginning of the format. Is like, all these synergy themes are going to just be amazing, and when we put them together, they're going to do the thing. But really, you kind of just want to be drafting like decent creatures and putting them in the red zone, and you know, that's kind of it.
Yeah, that's a feature of aggro too, not a bug,
Right.
I would say. I think that's why, especially early in formats when people are still figuring out whether synergies work, aggro tends to overperform. I'm really interested to see the 17 lands aggregate data about this set. I'd love to see some of the maps that Sirkovitz made for Kaldheim, specifically for this set. I have a feeling they'll be tightly packed as for high win percentage versions of certain decks. But yeah, I had a great, I should have screenshot. I had a great mental image earlier that kind of sums this up. I'm blanking on the names because, you know, it's only a week in, but there's the 1/3 blue fairy where whenever
Pixie
you roll a die, a pixie guide, and there's the 1/3 red dwarf where whenever you roll a die, you ping for one.
Brazen something. I don't remember the full name.
I had, it's just like brazen dwarf or some nonsense. I had 2 of each and an empty hand, and my opponent, and they're just on the battlefield. This is like later in the game, and my opponent had just played a bunch of like owlbears, and it just like fully obliterated me. There was nothing I could do about it. Like, and at that point, even my best draws in the deck, like Contact Other Plane, or I had a blue dragon in that deck. Nothing that I could have top decked at that point would have helped me because my vector just wasn't very built up in that deck. Like, if I had some of the things that could have supported that better, of course, I had maybe not the best draw. I did kind of flood out, but still, the deck just wasn't doing something good.
Yeah, I mean, and it's weird because in that deck, you almost want to say that those are payoffs because they don't roll the dice themselves, but they are linchpins in the roll dice deck, but they don't actually do anything. And that was kind of why we were talking in the format breakdown. I mentioned that I was a little bit perplexed by the fact that they don't trigger on each die that's rolled. They only trigger once per die roll, or grouping of die rolls.
They're underpowered.
Right.
It's so narrow.
Right. Yeah, the only times I've seen that deck really work is when you have multiple Farida and Barbarian classes and things like that. So you can like really cap it. And those are like still aggressive decks because they're just punching you for a ton of damage really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's also why Black-Red is so powerful in this format. I mean, the fact that it's really like 5-color Rakdos is something,
and it ramps.
Like, that's something. There's something to be said about that. But there are a lot of good red cards in this set. There's a lot of good removal in red. There's a lot of good aggressive creatures in red that can do the damaging thing. But then you also have the flexibility to play whatever rares you open because you can splash them off your treasures and things of that nature. So, and then it's probably why I think blue is on the weaker side. I think blue has some of the best rares in the set, but then it's a little bit lower in power level across the common and uncommon range, so it can be very swingy.
Yeah, and those rares and such don't play very well together. Take the 4-mana 2/5 that ventures when it deals combat damage, and imagine curving something like I don't know, Feywild Trickster. Is that the 3-mana 2/2 that makes fairies when you roll, right? Those two, like, in certain decks are good cards, but you just can't play them in the same deck. Yeah, blue is so fractured among what it wants to be doing. It wants to be doing this dice rolling thing and the venturing thing, and I think it just never really comes together fully unless you happen to be the only blue drafter and the packs crack just right.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of smashing, I have seen Brunor do some work. I think red white is a lot of fun. I've seen Brunor make. I had a hawk with like 11 power. Oh, yeah. Just had a couple of equipments on it, and Brunor can do some pretty nonsensical things and can end games really quickly before your opponent has the chance to kind of reassemble their board or draw into what they need. So I found red white to be a lot of fun. I think I have an underdrafting blue, which I guess I'm not gonna cry about too much because it's been a little rough around the edges. But I think I do want to get a little more experience with it before I judge it too harshly. I haven't played too many blue decks. I think I've only, out of my 16 drafts, probably only 2 or 3 have involved blue. I don't know. I'm just having a lot of fun with the Mardu colors and occasionally just slamming a bunch of owlbears or that kind of thing. Overall, still looking to get more data on this set, but as an overall final note on vectors, they're narrow. Find your vector and don't be afraid to go in. These busted life gain decks, when they go off, they work. When the busted die rolling decks go off, they really work. And you will get signals and you will know when they're open because you'll get like a pick 6 Feywild trickster. That means all 5 people to your right said, no thanks, not interested. Well, if you're in blue and you had like a Faraday already, just go in on it.
All right, on to Venture. When we did our format breakdown, we were kind of tossing up the idea of whether or not Venture would be similar to Learn Lesson in the way that, that provided pretty serious card advantage. I think we've both come to the decision that Venture is not Learn Lesson. It does not really give you that card advantage. None of the effects are very powerful enough to actually equate to a card. Even a lot of times when you've completed a full dungeon, you almost don't get a full card's value out of all of those effects. The only way to really gain serious value out of the dungeons is to be turboing through them, speed running them, as some folks have started calling it. This is really generally seen in like black-white, which has the ability to do this pretty regularly, or potentially blue-white with cards like Hama, but I even really would prefer to just splash Hama in a black-white deck and just get those extra triggers. I don't even really think the blue-white deck is a deck you really want to be pursuing.
Yeah, I will note that some of the ones that actually do draw cards, you do technically get your card back, but this isn't Learn Lesson in the same way that you can just go and for sure that you're going to get a 5/5, right, or a 4/4, depending on, or a 3/2 or a 2/1 or whatever you're grabbing, or a pair of 1/1s. It doesn't matter. In a way, it's almost like they took a bunch of creatures that would say like when X ability happens, scry 1, and they just kind of. It's like factoring out.
Yeah, a little bit.
It's as if they factored it out and they put it into these multi-option things, which are admittedly really cool. So just a little bit more about Venture. Top decking a Venture card, it might only get you a minor payoff, right? Top decking a Venture card might only get you a minor payoff. So I think if you're venturing, you really want to be venturing. If you're just playing a one-of Venture card just because you can, that's just a creature that says like ETB scry 1 or ETB gain a life. That might not necessarily be what you want to be doing. You really have to be able to trigger it reliably. So I've noticed this is different to when we would toss in cards that have Learn, because you knew that you could just learn and go get your Spirit Summoning or go get your Inkling Summoning or something like that. Now, something funny I found about Venture, a few little notes about this. If you have a creature that is locked down, say with an aura on it or something like that, you can go through the painful one. What's that one called? The lair? No, that's the other one.
No, Tomb of Annihilation.
Annihilation, right? And you can say sack your one creature so you don't have to lose the life or whatever. Or you can sacrifice it to the quick route and go get that 4/4 Death Toucher, which is a real body. That's a big thing in this format. Sometimes it needs to be double blocked. You can get through that pretty quick. Or another little note that I found. Pretty much everyone goes straight for Lost Mines of Pandelver, right? That's kind of the go-to one. And that helps you complete your first dungeon quick. If you're in a dungeon or if you're in a deck where you care about Venture, if you're like in a hardcore Venture deck, I found the most efficient way to make it through the Lost Mines, get all your Venture payoffs, so that like your dungeon completion payoffs. And then unless you have like a repetitive dungeon completion payoff, I guess Dungeon Crawler, which is hilariously named, something like that. I recommend then going through the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, because at the end, the payoff of getting to exile a bunch of stuff and free cast something, and even all the scrying along the way, that can actually be a pretty strong late game advantage.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. The Dungeon of the Mad Mage is, I think it takes too much to get through unless you can really turbo through. Like I've seen relatively controlling builds that run cards like 50 Feet of Rope and Dungeon Map, where you can reliably like you're venturing twice a turn and your opponent can't attack through your secret door or whatever, and you just get to go off because you're venturing twice a turn. Otherwise, I don't think it's really worth going through that because the payoff takes way too long to get to. Most games, if you've ventured 7 times, most games are over. So you're really not getting the value out of that. What I would say is I agree. I think the default should generally be Lost Mines of Phandelver, but if you're really aggressive and you know that you just want to close the game out, Tomb of Annihilation is not a bad option either, because you'll get that 4/4 pretty quick. You often can make a treasure or something and hold on to that to get rid of, so you can turbo through the tomb and get to that 4/4 pretty quickly without getting rid of cards that you actually need. You might have a token lying around, like a goblin off of, one of the various cards that generate goblins. You might have a card that you played that was decent on turn 1, but is no longer relevant by turn 3 or something, so you can sack that. Things like that. So if you know you're really aggressive, you're trying to put the pressure on and put the pain on your opponent, Tomb of Annihilation is a great one to start with as well.
Mm-hmm. You know you're in bad shape when your opponent got off to an aggressive start and they picked Tomb of Annihilation instead of like Mad Mage. Like, uh-oh, they're planning on ending this pretty quick. I will say there's been some discussion in our Discord about achievements. We'll toss around potential achievement lists. I don't know if this counts as an achievement, but I did get my last point of damage, I guess drain in this case, via the Tomb of Annihilation, which was pretty sick.
That's nice. All right, on to card advantage. Obviously, card advantage is important in any format, more so when the power level is so flat. I mean, that can be really big make or break, depending, like, to determine who's winning in a game. A lot of cards in this format that say draw a card on them are pretty good. Owlbear is one that comes to mind. Fantastic card. Obviously, they're never bad, but the last few formats just had a lot of ways to generate card advantage, so you really never ran out of cards. That is not here in this format. So the cards like Priest and Owlbear that say draw a card on them can be really big. That was a mention I said about the Potion of Healing. If you have ways to recur those things through something like Teleportation Circle or ways to buy creatures back from your graveyard, they matter a lot. And I think that was a consideration we had with the Priest was, well, it's a 3-mana 2/1, and that's generally not a card you want to play. But the fact that it synergizes with the green-white decks, so they care about that life gain, and more so than anything, it draws you a card, which is really big because it's hard to find good card advantage in this format.
Mm-hmm. If we think back to Strixhaven, a lot of games ended while players still had cards in hand, right? There were ways of making sure everyone had card advantage thanks to Learn and Lesson. Everyone had a bunch of cards in hand. Everyone was happy. But here, you will often have games where you've run out of things to do. And there are some things to do. You might be able to activate one of those abilities. There's a blue one that lets you roll dice, the black one lets you roll dice, and some other random mana sinks floating around in the form of classes. But even then, sometimes you run out of things to do. So when your opponent top decks an Owlbear, it feels brutal. And I think that kind of feeling is important to pay attention to. It's a good hint. It's a good way to point towards what is valuable in this format. When your opponent top decks Owlbear and they draw that card and then they top deck a removal spell or even just like a 3/3 or something, it feels brutal. That can take what once was a winnable game and just swing it all the way back around. So because the card advantage isn't as, I guess, plentiful among all colors, I do not think it's sufficiently offset by, say, venturing a bunch, because sometimes your opponent will draw into a way to prevent you from venturing, and then you're locked out of your method of advantage. They are not locked out of theirs. So I recommend taking cards like Owlbear and the Priest pretty highly.
Yeah, agreed.
Last but not least, we have some miscellaneous notes here. This is one we mentioned earlier, but Spare Dagger. I've had a lot of fun with this card. Putting it on a little Death Toucher, it honestly just becomes premium removal. And I've actually found including it in, I don't know, any deck that has a good number of 2-drops, because every once in a while your opponent will play an X1 that you really want to get rid of. I think, is it Yang T. Malison? Whatever the blue snake is. I had one game where I did not kill that thing with a Spare Dagger. I killed something else, and I was like, what could possibly go wrong? I killed something else later in the game. I played like a 3-drop on turn 3 instead of like equipping my 2-drop. And I was like, this thing's just gonna venture a bunch. Like, I can deal with that later. And then they like blew up my 2-drop, and then they killed my 3-drop, and I was never able to equip. And then they ended up just winning the game because I was an idiot. So I recommend using a Spare Dagger. If you need a 23rd card, you can put it in. It's great in the equipment decks. It's great if you have Death Touchers. It looks a lot like those equipment that you would never put in your deck, but I think it's a little bit in it looks. There are some very high impact X1s.
Agreed. Next up, Battlecry Goblin, early front runner for DCH or Draft Chaff Hero if you're not familiar with the term.
This card's
awesome. I have not personally made it work yet, and I have found myself questioning how so many people have made it work, but it does seem to be pretty great. It enables a lot, especially if you can go wide, and it helps you do that if it can get through. And it's just a 2-drop. 2-mana 2/2s are fantastic in formats like this, and this does a lot more on top of just being that. So yeah, really great. Other cards potentially in the running: Magic Missile, and there are a lot of decent cards in this format as far as the uncommon slot goes. But yeah, Battlecry Goblin's great.
Yep, love it. It feels a lot like a Rabble Master or a Goblin, or sorry, Legion War Boss. The way it can come down, if you're in one of those top deck scenarios where I just described, and you have a bunch of mana floating around, you have like 8 lands in play. You play it, you pump it, maybe you even have another Goblin or a token laying around. And then when you attack and get pack tactics, then you pump it a bunch more. So you went from having maybe like a 3/1 on board to having like a 3/1, a 4/2, and a 3/1.
Yeah,
that is a lot of value, and it's all swinging. It has haste then. So I've really liked the Battlecry Goblin. Pairs well with combat tricks and other things too. And I've also gone up on Tiger Tribe Hunter.
Yeah.
This card I was a little suspicious of, but now I've just started looking at it as any creature that you top deck and can cast afterwards basically just acts as a removal spell, a situational one, but it kind of gives all of your creatures like cast it to just trade with a thing as long as it has power equal to that thing's toughness.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. I found it pretty useful, and a 4/4 is actually a lot bigger than we gave credit for initially.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I did have the pleasure of playing with Grandmaster of Flowers, which was fantastic. If you can get a Monk of the Open Hand, which I did have, this card is stupid. I learned the fun way that it can get back a Monk from the library or the graveyard. So I remember I traded off the Monk. I got it to like a 2/2, and I traded for a 2/2. And then when I ticked up, I was like, wait a minute, that says graveyard? I can just go get the Monk back? And so I got the Monk back, and then I played another spell, and then it was a 2/2 again. I'm like, oh my god, this Monk is stupid. Highly recommend playing Grandmaster of Flowers. And don't be afraid to speculate on the Monk. If you're in white, you might cut it from your white deck. Not every white deck wants this if you're playing like a longer late game one. And even if you're trying to curve out and you're not double spelling that often, it's not great. Maybe take one if you think there's a chance you might somehow pick up a Grandmaster of Flowers in your draft. Next up, Black Red Sack. I think it's back.
Oh yeah, it's back, and it means business. Not only is Black Red just, I think, hands down probably the best archetype in the format, but there are like reasonable threat effects. There's like price of price of loyalty, where you grab a thing and then it pumps that thing, and there are a lot of good sack outlets. We talked about Sepulcher Zombie, I think, or Ghoul, I think.
It's the 2/1, right?
Yeah, it's a 2-mana 2/1 that there's no mana cost to activate, but you just sack a creature, but you can only do it once a turn, and it gets +2/+2. It's kind of like a powered down Nantuko Husk. We kind of trashed it. I said in the format breakdown that I was really excited about that card until I read that you can only do it once a turn, and then I was like, oh, that kind of sucks. So I'm not high on this card. I actually think it might be a top 3 black common. Like, I think it's really good. And on top of that, you have things like Skullport Merchant, which allows you to sack creatures or artifacts. When I first read that card, I was like, oh, cool, it's sacking treasures. No, it can sack your opponent's stuff too if you can steal them. So there are a lot of good sack outlets. There are a lot of good threat effects, and when you get the two of those together, this deck does its thing. Plus, it's pumping out treasures and trying to do its whatever else it's trying to do, and playing random rares and whatever. It seems great. I'm very excited to try to draft this deck because I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, Black Red has a lot of depth in this format. Unlike a lot of the other kind of narrower colors, this is kind of a subsection of Black Red that's enabled just because of the nature of Black and Red cards. Black and Red still is doing its main treasure thing, but that actually kind of helps because it gives you more mana so that you can, say, actually cast a threaten effect and activate a sack ability on the same turn, which you might not have been able to do otherwise. In some formats, you just can't do this because the threaten costs like 3 or 4, and then the sack abilities all cost like 2 or 3. And then you're looking at turn 6, 7 before you're ever able to do this. You can get this combo off on turn 3 if you want it to, if it works. So keep an eye out for Black Red Sack. I can't wait to try that one out myself.
All right, and lastly here in our miscellaneous section, we want to talk a little bit about venture cards. If you have enough of them, you can kind of splash off of treasures without any other real fixing because you can guarantee that second venture on Lost Mine to give you a treasure. if you can't venture or make treasures reliably, splashing is pretty bad. In fact, I would actually argue that you should probably be leaning to almost a monocolored deck with like splashing a second color as opposed to trying to splash a third color. You won't really find yourself doing that often, but we have seen some decks that almost look monocolored with like a little bit of extra flavor, with extra color added. And if you can kind of take on the mindset during the draft portion that you're drafting something close to a monocolored deck, you're going to find that you'll be able to play your stuff a lot easier. But Evolving Wilds and Temple of Dragon Queen are cards. Take them when you need them. Take them when you have no other, don't take a crappy common when there's an Evolving Wilds or a Temple in the pack. Like, take those cards so you have access to them. We also see a lot of relevant 2-pip cards, a lot of the high-end, like all the dragons. We see the elementals at the top end, all double-pipped. Magic Missile's double-pipped. There are a bunch of 3-drops that are double-pipped. You have the one red 3/3 haste that's double-pipped. So there are a lot of cards. Charm Sleep. I could go on and on. There are a lot of cards that are double-pipped in the set. A lot of them are playable and actually some of the better cards in the format. It's not easy to cast a lot of those, especially when you're like trying to splash a third color or something of that nature. So really be mindful of your mana base and be mindful of what cards you're trying to cast and when you're trying to cast them. And
if you have any other miscellaneous notes or thoughts on the format, just hop in the Discord and let us know. I guess, hold on, I'm stealing a little bit of Zach's sign-off. That's going to do it for us this week here on Draft Chaff. Hop in the Discord and let us know what you think of AFR so far, because it's a really cool set. There's a lot of things going on. We're all still figuring it out, though. It might take us a little bit longer for this one than other formats. That's all right. We're all in it together. So hop in there and let us know what you think, and you can see what we think.
Yeah, and the link to that is in the episode description as well as on our Twitter page. Also, if you want to give back to the show or support us, definitely check out the Patreon. That's the best place to give back. Patreon.com/DraftChaffPod. And again, we're going to be adding quite a few things there throughout the next couple of weeks and months. So keep checking back if there's just not quite enough there for you. Otherwise, thank you to all our patrons. As always, we really appreciate it and wouldn't be doing this without you. Also, if you want to reach out to us outside of the Discord, you can do so on Twitter. You can find me at Rannick Alfredian, Ben at BetaFish1, or the podcast in general, which we both check out. You can find that at Draft Chaff Pod. That's it for us. We'll chat with you next week. Enjoy the rest of your AFR this week.
So, as you may have heard, Zach and I have a pre-release to crush. Actually, the day that this comes out. So if you're listening on release day, it's happening probably right now as you're listening. We are cracking some packs. And I would like to know, Zach, what are you most hoping to open?
This is a tough question for me to... I think didn't we talk about this last week? Pretty sure you asked this.
Well, now we've actually played with...
Okay, that's fair.
We've played with the cards, so now we get to update it and actually have some. Because I have one that you will never predict. I would bet $10 right now that you could not predict the card that I most want to open.
Interesting. I'm debating whether I want to take you up on that bet. How many guesses do I get? Do I have to do that in one guess?
All right, tell you what, $5, 3 guesses.
Oh, I'll take that.
You have to answer
I'll take
first,
that bet
though.
easily. Yeah, of course I'll answer first.
Right.
If you tell me, that defeats the whole thing.
Well, no.
Guess all 3.
I still want to know you.
Oh
no, I still want to know the card that you want to open.
I see.
Then we'll get to
all
this.
Right, sure. I'm not positive. You're talking about like your promo or just any card?
I guess promo or anything. What do you most want to see in that promo?
Okay,
spot?
I think what I want to most see in the promo spot is Xanathar, because I haven't gotten to draft that card yet, and it looks hilariously fun. Like
oh my god, it sucks.
Yeah, exactly. My desire to just like lock all my opponents out of pre-release, especially because I have a feeling we're going to be facing a bunch of people who have already like gotten familiar with the format and stuff, which I'm a little nervous isn't the right word, but I'm a little skeptical about how that's going to change the feel of pre-release. Like, I'm worried it's not going to actually feel like a pre-release. But anyway, Xanathar's up there. Yeah. I would really like to open the Grandmaster. I think that would just be really cool. Lulth seems really good as well. So probably excuse me, one of those 3.
All right. You're up. You get 3 guesses. We got $5 riding on the line.
All right.
What is the card that I want to open most at pre-release?
Do I get, before I answer anything, do I get any information about rarity or anything at all? I just have to make a guess. Are we?
No, nothing. But it's good. Like, what do I most want to see in my my
okay,
promo?
so that answers a little bit about rarity. Because I'm not guessing about comments.
That's all I'm giving
yeah,
you.
That's
though.
fine. Let's see here.
Get the spoiler.
I
up.
may or may not be looking at the
Through.
spoiler here.
Because obviously, like knowing me, the classic answer would be something like Inferno of the Star Mounts, which I did get to play and it was awesome. I don't think you can actually ever 20 your opponent.
I think I saw somebody said they did in our Discord.
Someone did already? Oh,
yeah, I think Mothman did, but I'm not positive about that.
That's awesome. I'll have to go check that out. But Inferno is pretty sick. Maybe if you double its power and then pump it a little bit, that's doable actually.
Could be.
But anyway.
All right.
Well, what are you thinking? 3 guesses.
My first guess is Demi-Lich, because you said it's a card that I wouldn't expect. And I don't think I would expect you to want Demi-Lich.
Looks like I owe you $5.
Yo! First guess! I'm amazing.
God damn. So I had the opportunity to play with Demi-Lich today, and it is awesome. I loved Demi-Lich. I didn't think I would either. I mean, a card that costs 4 blue, that's less me than Cryptic, and I would never cast a Cryptic. But to be fair, I was able to cast it at one point for blue, so it doesn't really count. This card is sick. The ability for it to rebuy instants and sorceries when you attack. I'm pretty sure every like Legacy and Vintage player wants this. How much is this thing worth right now? I bet it's up there.
It is currently worth $25.
All right, then foil Demi-Lich, here we come.
Yeah. It's an interesting card. I don't actually know that I think it's good in limited, or at least in draft, because like how many instants and sorceries are you casting in this format? I feel like most decks aren't casting very many. And if you are, like, you really need the Demi-Lich to already be in your hand, or like already be on the board, or I don't know. It feels like it's not actually that good.
Hear me out. It's a color shifted flame painter of Freet with higher power.
You're not casting your opponent's stuff.
No. That was could that cast
Pretty sure
opponent's stuff?
Flame Painter did. Now I gotta look it up.
I don't think that's it. But anyway,
oh no, I lied. I was thinking of a different card.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hear me out. Usually the spells that you are playing are good. They're good enough, right? You're playing like a Faraday's Fireball or like a Dragon's Fire with this, or like a bounce spell or a counter. I guess counter doesn't work with this, but something like that, or a card draw spell. I found Demi-Lich to be awesome. Also, at worst case, it's like often going to be a 3-mana 4/3 in blue. And then if you ever get to do that exile a bunch of stuff to bring it back clause, you've probably won the game if you've cast that many instants and sorceries. So trust me, this one's worth playing.
Okay, but all I'm thinking now is like, you're like, all right, I'm getting away with something. I'm playing this 4-mana, this 3-mana 4/3, right? Let's say you can cast it for 3. And then your opponent has a Hobgoblin Captain on the other side of the board. Like, what?
You attack and you buy back Dragon's Fire and you free cast Dragon's Fire on the Hobgoblin Captain. Dude, take your $5 and just be happy with it.
All right. I want to be proven wrong. Don't get me like I do really love this card. I'm just not sure that it's. I think LSV gave this like a 1.5 out of 5 for draft. Like I don't know that it's actually good in this format. I think it could be amazing in some formats, and I would love to play this in like a constructed deck of some kind, like I don't know, turbo spells or something. Sounds like really fun for this. But we'll see.
Well, when I open it as my promo and smash you, and once we get paired in round 1, then you'll know.
Hey, I'm going out of this tournament with a $5 net win, so I'm cool.